Madam President, are we in a quorum call?
We are not.
Madam President, a few weeks ago I spoke about the tragic death of a National Guard service member here in Washington, D.C. on the eve of Thanksgiving. While I salute, and we should all salute, the bravery of those who risk their lives to keep us safe, we can't ignore the reality that this woman was yet another unnecessary victim of President Biden's careless immigration policies. The man who committed this heinous crime was an Afghan national who President Biden allowed to enter the United States without proper vetting after our disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. He did this via a procedure known as parole, which I'll explain more about in a minute, but this was not in accordance with any law or any visa recognized by Congress or passed through a legislative act. This was done on a wholesale abuse of something called parole authority. Here is as I said, I will explain a little bit more, but parole allows inadmissible aliens, that means people from other countries, to be physically present in the United States. It's designed to be used on a case-by-case basis, but was widely abused by the Biden administration to circumvent Congress. So I asked my friendly AI assistant to give me a summary of some of the parole programs that were used by President Biden to circumvent Congress and the legislative process. There was a process known for Colombians, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. Up to 30,000 people a month were basically waived into the United States due to the abuse of this so-called parole process. Then there was Uniting for Ukraine, which allowed roughly 267,000 Ukrainians paroled into the United States. There was Operation Allies Welcome, which this individual who perpetrated this crime against these two guardsmen here over Thanksgiving was part of. That 77,000 Afghans were evacuated and paroled into the United States. There was another one called Keeping Families Together, which was enjoined by a federal court. Then there was one called the Family Reunification Parole Program, which expanded the program for Cubans and Haitians and for certain other family-based visa beneficiaries facing long waits. And then finally, there was the Central American Minors Program expansion to allow more minors from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to apply for refugee status or parole to reunite with their families here in the country. So the point is, by abusing the parole process that's supposed to be used on a case-by-case basis, President Biden waved through, gave them essentially an easy pass into the United States, about 1 million people from foreign countries. And this particular shooter who killed one National Guardsman and injured another was a product of this parole program, the one that happened to do with Afghans, but that was just a piece of a larger puzzle of 1 million illegal immigrants admitted to the United States through the parole program by Joe Biden because he wanted to circumvent Congress. Well, this young woman, who was killed during the Thanksgiving holidays, her sacrifice demands that we look for the mistakes and the flawed decisions that allowed her killer to enter the United States, and we take swift corrective action. I want to remind my colleagues that this crime was at the hands of a Afghan national parolee, and it was not a one-off incident. For example, the next week, another parolee nearly committed a terrorist attack in Fort Worth, Texas. In this instance, the man created a video threat where he described his plans to carry out a suicide mission to kill Americans. This was in Fort Worth, Texas. The man explained in the video how he would use a particular cooking oil container preferred by the Taliban to build a bomb inside his car and then use this handcrafted device to murder Americans. This individual's intentions were clear. In the video, he expressed his affection for the Taliban, which is a terrorist organization now governing Afghanistan, and he stated that he had entered the United States for the explicit purpose of killing Americans. Thankfully, federal and local law enforcement were able to apprehend him before he was able to carry out the attack. I'm grateful to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and our state and local law enforcement officials who prevented this attack from happening, in all likelihood killing some of my constituents back home in Texas. However, the fact that this individual was here in the first place underscores yet another failure of the Biden administration to properly vet individuals who entered the country, again, not through any law, but through this abuse of something called parole. How could someone like this intended suicide bomber, who in his own words came into the country with the express intent of killing Americans, slip through the cracks? Well, we know there were more than just cracks in the Biden administration's vetting process. In many cases, it was virtually non-existent. The repeated incidents committed and attempted by Afghan nationals in the very same week demonstrate that something has gone terribly wrong with the way the United States government during the Biden administration was vetting or failing to vet aliens who've entered our country. But again, as you heard me go through the various categories of individuals that came into the country under this abuse of the parole authority, about 1 million, how in the world could the Biden administration have adequately vetted 1 million paroled immigrants? It can't do it. And that's one reason why this young National Guardswoman is dead. For this reason, I'm chairing a joint Judiciary Subcommittee hearing later this week alongside of Senator Hawley from Missouri, entitled Biden's Afghan Parole Program, a Trojan Horse with Flawed Vetting and Deadly Consequences. We'll examine the policies implemented by the Biden administration that led to these catastrophic events, and particularly the flaws in President Biden's mass immigration parole programs. As I said earlier, parole, ordinarily we would think about it's in a criminal law context, somebody who's gone to prison who then is paroled. But this is a totally different term used in immigration and essentially constituting an easy pass, waving people into the country without the normal procedures. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service defines the word parole as the discretionary decision to allow inadmissible aliens who are not admitted to the United States to be physically present. In other words, these individuals are ostensibly physically present legally, but they are not admitted for purposes of immigration. Well, under Operation Allies Welcome, President Biden essentially gave an easy pass to 77,000 aliens who weren't eligible to come to the United States by the law as it then existed in the first place. This so-called discretionary immigration authority was only supposed to be used, again, on a case-by-case basis for exceedingly rare and extreme circumstances. But the Biden administration turned this rare exception into the categorical rule. Just like he opened the floodgates at the southern border, he opened the floodgates for hundreds of thousands of ineligible aliens just to come to the United States and presumably stay. And now we know that when it comes to the parole, the Afghan parole program, Operation Allies Welcome, the Biden administration allowed in many aliens who had not been properly vetted. I would venture to say, Madam President, that the man who drove across the country to murder one of our National Guard service members and the man who threatened to carry out the suicide mission in Fort Worth were not eligible to enter the United States. But the Biden administration let them in anyway. And as we will learn at the hearing, in most, if not all cases, we quite literally did not know who these people were. Many of them could not say where they were born. Many of them did not speak English. And in some cases, they did not even know their own last name. I know that's hard to imagine, but it's true. And many of them were coming from a country whose government was literally run by a terrorist organization, the Taliban. Consequently, it's quite possible that some of these aliens had previously committed acts of terror or had ties to terror groups. The lack of information on these parolees also raises the possibility of a preliminary background check coming across as clean, because there simply wasn't enough information available to know whether this person was a safety risk or not. In this week's hearing, we'll learn more about this and other problems with President Biden's mass parole of Afghan nationals into the United States. We'll hear expert witnesses, including Deputy Inspectors General from the Department of State and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, as well as researchers and advocates who will help shine a light on the missteps of the Biden administration and hopefully the lessons we should learn from those mistakes. The American people deserve to live in a country where they're safe from criminal aliens and terrorist sympathizers, and they deserve answers about what the Biden administration did or did not do to make their life more risky and more dangerous by abusing this so-called parole authority. We must expose the previous administration's mistakes so we can learn from those, and together we can ensure that the awful tragedy that happened on November the 26th will not happen again. Madam President, I yield the floor. And I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.